1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 3. And when the people were come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that, when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies. Psalms chapter 59 verse 10. My God on whom I can rely. God will go before me and will let me gloat over those who slander me. Proverbs chapter 28 verse 18. The one whose walk is blameless is kept safe, but the one whose ways are perverse will fall into the pit. 2 Chronicles chapter 25 verse 8. But if thou wilt go, do it, be strong for the battle, God shall make thee fall before the enemy, for God hath power to help, and to cast down. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 25. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies, thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 7. The Lord shall cause thine enemies that rise up against thee to be smitten before thy face, they shall come out against thee one way, and flee before thee 7 ways. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 5. Perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness, from such withdraw thyself. 2 Corinthians chapter 11 verse 3. But I fear, lest by any means, as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtlety, so your minds should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. Jeremiah chapter 20 verse 11. But the Lord is with me as a mighty terrible one, therefore my persecutors shall stumble, and they shall not prevail, they shall be greatly ashamed, for they shall not prosper, their everlasting confusion shall never be forgotten. Isaiah chapter 29 verse 8. It shall even be as when an hungry man dreameth, and, behold, he eateth, but he awaketh, and his soul is empty, or as when a thirsty man dreameth, and, behold, he drinketh, but he awaketh, and, behold, he is faint, and his soul hath appetite, so shall the multitude of all the nations be, that fight against Mount Zion. 1 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 7. Now therefore there is utterly a fault among you, because ye go to law one with another. Why do ye not rather take wrong? Why do ye not rather suffer yourselves to be defrauded? Romans chapter 11 verse 12. Now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? Proverbs chapter 15 verse 22. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisers they succeed. 2 Kings chapter 3 verse 26. And when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men that drew swords, to break through even unto the king of Edom, but they could not. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 8. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so did these also resist the truth, men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. Matthew chapter 7 verse 27. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Hebrews chapter 4 verse 6. Seeing therefore it remaineth that some must enter therein, and they to whom it was first preached entered not in because of unbelief. Luke chapter 14 verse 29 through 30. Lest haply, after he hath laid the foundation, and is not able to finish it, all that behold it begin to mock him, saying, This man began to build, and was not able to finish. Matthew chapter 17 verse 15 through 16. Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is lunatic, and sore vexed, for ofttimes he falleth into the fire, and oft into the water. And I brought him to thy disciples, and they could not cure him. Daniel chapter 11 verse 22. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, yea, also the prince of the covenant. Joshua chapter 8 verse 15. And Joshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them, and fled by the way of the wilderness. 2 Samuel chapter 18 verse 7. Where the people of Israel were slain before the servants of David, and there was there a great slaughter that day of 20,000 men. 2 Kings chapter 14 verse 12. He was 25 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jehoaddan of Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles chapter 25 verse 22. And Judah was put to the worse before Israel, and they fled every man to his tent. Psalms chapter 83 verse 9 through 10. Do to them as you did to Midian, as you did to Sisera and Jabin at the river Kishon, who perished at Endor and became like dung on the ground. Psalms chapter 83 verse 17 through 18. May they ever be ashamed and dismayed, may they perish in disgrace. Let them know that you, whose name is the Lord, that you alone are the Most High over all the earth. Psalms chapter 89 verse 43. Indeed, you have turned back the edge of his sword, and have not supported him in battle. Proverbs chapter 12 verse 7. The wicked are overthrown and are no more, but the house of the righteous stands firm. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 9. One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 22. For those two will send sudden destruction on them, and who knows what calamities they can bring. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 11 through 12. Therefore thy gates shall be open continually, they shall not be shut day nor night, that men may bring unto thee the forces of the Gentiles, and that their kings may be brought. For the nation and kingdom that will not serve thee shall perish, yea, those nations shall be utterly wasted. Judges chapter 20 verse 36. So the children of Benjamin saw that they were smitten, for the men of Israel gave place to the Benjamites, because they trusted unto the liers in wait which they had set beside Gibeah. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 29. Oh that they were wise, that they understood this, that they would consider their latter end. Joshua chapter 7 verse 8. O Lord, what shall I say, when Israel turneth their backs before their enemies? Judges chapter 4 verse 23. So God subdued on that day Jabin the king of Canaan before the children of Israel. Judges chapter 8 verse 12. And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them, and took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited all the host. 2 Samuel chapter 10 verse 15. And when the Syrians saw that they were smitten before Israel, they gathered themselves together. Psalms chapter 33 verse 17. A horse is a vain hope for deliverance, despite all its great strength it cannot save. Psalms chapter 54 verse 7. You have delivered me from all my troubles, and my eyes have looked in triumph on my foes. Psalms chapter 76 verse 3. There he broke the flashing arrows, the shields and the swords, the weapons of war. Psalms chapter 92 verse 9. For surely your enemies, Lord, surely your enemies will perish. All evildoers will be scattered. Psalms chapter 92 verse 11. My eyes have seen the defeat of my adversaries. My ears have heard the rout of my wicked foes. Psalms chapter 118 verse 7. The Lord is with me, he is my helper. I look in triumph on my enemies. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 8. The wise in heart accept commands, but a chattering fool comes to ruin. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 10. Whoever winks maliciously causes grief, and a chattering fool comes to ruin. Proverbs chapter 10 verse 14. The wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool invites ruin. Proverbs chapter 11 verse 10. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices, when the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Proverbs chapter 28 verse 18. The one whose walk is blameless is kept safe, but the one whose ways are perverse will fall into the pit. Proverbs chapter 26 verse 28. A lying tongue hates those it hurts, and a flattering mouth works ruin. Isaiah chapter 1 verse 28. And the destruction of the transgressors and of the sinners shall be together, and they that forsake the Lord shall be consumed. Isaiah chapter 54 verse 15. Behold, they shall surely gather together, but not by me, whosoever shall gather together against thee shall fall for thy sake. Jeremiah chapter 10 verse 21. For the pastors are become brutish, and have not sought the Lord, therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. Ezekiel chapter 23 verse 33. You will be filled with drunkenness and sorrow. The cup of ruin and desolation. The cup of your sister Samaria. Ezekiel chapter 32 verse 9. I will trouble the hearts of many peoples. When I bring about your destruction among the nations. Among lands you have not known. Daniel chapter 11 verse 19. After this, he will turn back toward the fortresses of his own country but will stumble and fall, to be seen no more. Daniel chapter 11 verse 26. Those who eat from the king's provisions will try to destroy him, his army will be swept away, and many will fall in battle. Amos chapter 5 verse 9. That strengtheneth the spoiled against the strong, so that the spoiled shall come against the fortress. John chapter 12 verse 8. For the poor always ye have with you, but me ye have not always. Leviticus chapter 26 verse 17. And I will set my face against you, and ye shall be slain before your enemies, they that hate you shall reign over you, and ye shall flee when none pursueth you. Numbers chapter 14 verse 42. Go not up, for the Lord is not among you, that ye be not smitten before your enemies. Joshua chapter 11 verse 19. There was not a city that made peace with the children of Israel, save the Hivites the inhabitants of Gibeon, all other they took in battle. Judges chapter 4 verse 15. And the Lord discomfited Sisera, and all his chariots, and all his host, with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera lighted down off his chariot, and fled away on his feet. Judges chapter 20 verse 35. And the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 25,100 men, all these drew the sword. 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 2. And the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew of the army in the field about 4,000 men. 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 10. And the Philistines fought, and Israel was smitten, and they fled every man into his tent, and there was a very great slaughter, for there fell of Israel 30,000 footmen. 2 Samuel chapter 1 verse 4. And David said unto him, How went the matter? I pray thee, tell me. And he answered, That the people are fled from the battle, and many of the people also are fallen and dead, and Saul and Jonathan his son are dead also. 2 Samuel chapter 2 verse 17. And there was a very sore battle that day, and Abner was beaten, and the men of Israel, before the servants of David. 2 Samuel chapter 10 verse 18. And the Syrians fled before Israel, and David slew the men of 700 chariots of the Syrians, and 40,000 horsemen, and smote Shobach the captain of their host, who died there. 1 King chapter 8 verse 33 through 34. When thy people Israel be smitten down before the enemy, because they have sinned against thee, and shall turn again to thee, and confess thy name, and pray, and make supplication unto thee in this house, then hear thou in heaven, and forgive the sin of thy people Israel, and bring them again unto the land which thou gavest unto their fathers. 2 King chapter 3 verse 26. And when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men that drew swords, to break through even unto the king of Edom, but they could not. 1 King chapter 19 verse 16. And Jehu the son of Nimshi shalt thou anoint to be king over Israel, and Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel-Maholah shalt thou anoint to be prophet in thy room. 2 King chapter 6 verse 24. And it came to pass after this, that Ben-Hadad king of Syria gathered all his host, and went up, and besieged Samaria. Psalms chapter 31 verse 1. In you, Lord, I have taken refuge, let me never be put to shame, deliver me in your righteousness. Psalms chapter 40 verse 14. May all who want to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. Psalms chapter 44 verse 7. But you give us victory over our enemies, you put our adversaries to shame. Psalms chapter 59 verse 10. My God on whom I can rely. God will go before me and will let me gloat over those who slander me. Psalms chapter 70 verse 2. May those who want to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. Psalms chapter 112 verse 8. Their hearts are secure, they will have no fear. In the end they will look in triumph on their foes. Proverbs chapter 17 verse 19. Whoever loves a quarrel loves sin. Whoever builds a high gate invites destruction. Proverbs chapter 29 verse 1. Whoever remains stiff-necked after many rebukes will suddenly be destroyed, without remedy. Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 16. Be not righteous over much, neither make thyself over wise, why shouldest thou destroy thyself? Isaiah chapter 7 verse 8. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. Isaiah chapter 8 verse 9. Associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces, and give ear, all ye of far countries, gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces, gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Isaiah chapter 41 verse 11. Behold, all they that were incensed against thee shall be ashamed and confounded, they shall be as nothing, and they that strive with thee shall perish. Jeremiah chapter 46 verse 5. Wherefore have I seen them dismayed and turned away back? And their mighty ones are beaten down, and are fled apace, and look not back, for fear was round about, saith the Lord. Jeremiah chapter 48 verse 5. For in the going up of Luhith continual weeping shall go up, for in the going down of Horonaim the enemies have heard a cry of destruction. Jeremiah chapter 48 verse 20. Moab is confounded, for it is broken down, howl and cry, tell ye it in Arnon, that Moab is spoiled. Jeremiah chapter 49 verse 28. Concerning Kedar, and concerning the kingdoms of Hazor, which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon shall smite, thus saith the Lord, Arise ye, go up to Kedar, and spoil the men of the east. Ezekiel chapter 26 verse 21. I will make thee a terror, and thou shalt be no more, though thou be sought for, yet shalt thou never be found again, saith the Lord God. Daniel chapter 11 verse 18. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease, without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Daniel chapter 11 verse 41. He shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. Hosea chapter 7 verse 13. Woe unto them! For they have fled from me, destruction unto them! Because they have transgressed against me, though I have redeemed them, yet they have spoken lies against me. Obadiah chapter 1 verse 12. But thou shouldest not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger, neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Deuteronomy chapter 1 verse 42. And the Lord said unto me, Say unto them, Go not up, neither fight, for I am not among you, lest ye be smitten before your enemies. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 26. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon utterly perish from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it, ye shall not prolong your days upon it. but shall utterly be destroyed. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 7. The Lord shall cause thine enemies that rise up against thee to be smitten before thy face, they shall come out against thee one way, and flee before thee 7 ways. Joshua chapter 24 verse 11. And you went over Jordan, and came unto Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you, the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Girgashites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, and I delivered them into your hand. Judges chapter 2 verse 19. And it came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned, and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, in following other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. Judges chapter 20 verse 32. And the children of Benjamin said, They are smitten down before us, as at the first. But the children of Israel said, Let us flee, and draw them from the city unto the highways. 2 Samuel chapter 10 verse 19. And when all the kings that were servants to Hadarezer saw that they were smitten before Israel, they made peace with Israel, and served them. So the Syrians feared to help the children of Ammon any more. 1 Chronicles chapter 19 verse 19. And when the servants of Hadarezer saw that they were put to the worse before Israel, they made peace with David, and became his servants, neither would the Syrians help the children of Ammon any more. Esther chapter 4 verse 14. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place, but thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Psalms chapter 53 verse 5. But there they are, overwhelmed with dread. Where there was nothing to dread. God scattered the bones of those who attacked you. You put them to shame, for God despised them. Isaiah chapter 3 verse 9. The show of their countenance doth witness against them, and they declare their sin as Sodom, they hide it not. Woe unto their soul! For they have rewarded evil unto themselves. Isaiah chapter 29 verse 8. It shall even be as when an hungry man dreameth, and, behold, he eateth, but he awaketh, and his soul is empty, or as when a thirsty man dreameth, and, behold, he drinketh, but he awaketh, and, behold, he is faint, and his soul hath appetite, so shall the multitude of all the nations be, that fight against Mount Zion. Isaiah chapter 46 verse 10. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done, saying, My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Ezekiel chapter 32 verse 10. Yea, I will make many people amazed at thee, and their kings shall be horribly afraid for thee, when I shall brandish my sword before them, and they shall tremble at every moment, every man for his own life, in the day of thy fall. Micah chapter 7 verse 10. Then she that is mine enemy shall see it, and shame shall cover her which said unto me, Where is the Lord thy God? Mine eyes shall behold her, now shall she be trodden down as the mire of the streets. Romans chapter 11 verse 11. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? God forbid, but rather through their fall salvation is come unto the Gentiles, for to provoke them to jealousy. Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 25. The Lord shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies, thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. Joshua chapter 7 verse 12. Therefore the children of Israel could not stand before their enemies, but turned their backs before their enemies, because they were accursed, neither will I be with you any more, except ye destroy the accursed from among you. Joshua chapter 10 verse 12. Then spake Joshua to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel, and he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou, Moon, in the valley of Ajalon. 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 17. And the messenger answered and said, Israel is fled before the Philistines, And there hath been also a great slaughter among the people, and thy 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God is taken. 1 Chronicles chapter 10 verse 7 through 8. And when all the men of Israel that were in the valley saw that they fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, then they forsook their cities, and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. 1 Chronicles chapter 19 verse 17. And it was told David, and he gathered all Israel, and passed over Jordan, and came upon them, and set the battle in array against them. So when David had put the battle in array against the Syrians, they fought with him. 2 Chronicles chapter 28 verse 23. For he sacrificed unto the gods of Damascus, which smote him, and he said, Because the gods of the kings of Syria help them, therefore will I sacrifice to them, that they may help me. But they were the ruin of him, and of all Israel. 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 3. And when the people were come into the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that, when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies.